Okay, so to get started, we're going to do some introductions of our panelists so we learn a little bit about them and why they're here. And we're going to start with Carrie Lukas. Carrie, wave a little bit. There you are. So Carrie is the president of the Independent Women's Forum. She's a senior fellow at the Goldwater Institute and a contributor to various media outlets like Forbes. So Carrie, I would love for you to tell us two things. One, something that you appreciate in the space that you're in right now. Oh yes, we're gonna bring back those spaces we're in. And then, and also tell us why you wanted to be part of this discussion tonight.
Sure. Well, first, I'm really fortunate to be here. I'm in Great Falls, Virginia. My husband is in the Foreign Service, and so we've been living in Berlin, Germany until this summer. And so we're just moving back. I still have, I tried to keep it kind of clean behind me, but there's boxes around. I've got 5 kids, ages 5 to 15. So a lot of clutter, but I'm lucky to be in back in the USA and to be with my family. I'm really excited to be here tonight because I think that so often conversations about women in public policy tend to be lopsided or really limited and miss kind of the breadth of issues that women care about. At Independent Women's Forum, we have a saying that all issues are women's issues, which I think is really true, and it's important to have a broad conversation about what that is and how women are impacted, not just as women, but as individuals.
All right, thank you, Carrie.
Thanks.
We're going now to Philippa Hughes. So Philippa, you are a cultural strategist and the creator of various public projects, including Looking for America, which was a project that brought together people of different views across the country to ask what it means to be an American. So same 2 questions to you. What's something in your space you're appreciating and would love to show off? And it looks like you've got a few options over there. And also tell us why you wanted to be here tonight. Oh, I think you're muted. And every time.
Shoot. I do a lot of Zoom conversations with people from across the political spectrum, and I'm so frustrated I just did that thing that I'm talking other people about. I work mostly in the arts here in Washington, D.C. And so I've been very excited about being able to use art as a way to open up conversations between people who are very different from each other and who might not normally want to talk to each other. But we use art not only as a framing device, but as a way to say, here, to create the space that the space is the art. And so my physical space that I live in, I've tried to turn almost into like an art piece unto itself. And so, so that's what I'm excited about, is how we use art in our everyday lives. And then the second question was,
why did you want to be here tonight?
Yeah. Well, Luke invited me right around the, right after Justice Ginsburg passed away. And I don't know, I just felt very emotional after that. And, and she said, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. And she said a lot of things that I love, but that is something that I've really taken to heart. And so I feel that, anytime I have an opportunity to speak in any positions, particularly in positions of power, but anywhere, I want to be a part of those conversations in my adoration of RBG.
Rad, thank you. All right, Patrice Onwuka. Hello, Patrice. You are a policy analyst for the Independent Women's Forum, a fellow at the Alliance for Charitable Excellence, and a political commentator. I caught you on Fox News the other night. It's fun, previewing the debate. So same thing to you. Tell us what you appreciate in the space you're in right now and why you are excited to be here tonight.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Patrice. I think it's fun behind me. I've got some decorative mirrors. They are fun. They're great when I need to just get that last minute hair and makeup check before I do my Zoom TV hits or whatever the case is. So I fell in love with them, and my husband put them up, and so they're fun. I'm really excited to be here tonight because I always appreciate having the opportunity to present a perspective that folks don't necessarily always hear. Over the course of tonight, you'll probably learn some things about me that may be surprising, given my gender and my race and my ethnicity. And I like that because I think we so often put people in a box based on what they look like and what we assume they should, we assume they should think. And, beyond my race and my gender, I'm a mom. I have a 4-month-old sleeping upstairs and a 21-month-old. So yes, 2 under 2. And really, honestly, those two and my 8-year-old stepson, they really inform the way I look at life as a woman in this country more than anything else. So excited to share some of those thoughts with you.
All right, thanks, Patrice. And last but not least, Kelly Gibson. You are a partner at Hamburger Gibson Creative, a Democratic media shop, and specialize in work on women's campaigns for elected office. So Kelly, we'll turn over to your space. Tell us what you appreciate about it and what you appreciate about being here tonight.
My little space. I also have school-age kids at home. My kids are 7 and 9-year-old boys, so I have occupied this corner of a guest room, which I've turned into an office with a folding table. I worked a majority of this pandemic at the dining room table, and when I finally moved into the room with the door, my 7-year-old said, "I miss you so much. I never see you anymore." I was like, "We're together all the time." He said, "But now you have a door." He was so offended by it. But it is nice. I work in campaign elections, so we are 34 days away from election day, and so I am quite busy on campaigns up and down the ballot across the country. I do mostly work for women, both candidates and independent expenditures. I do work for the Democrats. I'm a progressive feminist. I do agree with Carrie that all issues are women's issues, but I think some things tend to be slightly more personal for us than they are for the men among us. My space, I have chosen like 8 pieces to hang behind me. I'm from Buffalo, New York, so I always have a Buffalo close by, go Bills. And I met my husband on a political campaign, and that's a poster from it. It was a 2006 election cycle, and he saved it until our 10th anniversary to give it to me. So it's a reminder that I have the support of a great partner. When I'm in election cycle, he's the lead parent. He feeds them and keeps them alive while I work as hard as I possibly can. So it reminds me of a good partnership, and I'm excited to be here as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. I realized I shouldn't not be part of this party. I am sharing here. This says, "Think of all your problems and solve them." It's written on an index card, and I wrote it sometime between 3rd and 4th grade. It was a to-do item on a list for one day. I thought I could just, think of all my problems and solve them. So in the spirit of, ambition, we'll start with our first question. Something that you all have in common is that you've chosen to spend your time advocating for a better society according to your values and what that means to you. So let's start by looking at the future. And I want each of you to share what you hope for women. Imagine that it's 10 years from now and women are more supported and empowered than ever. What does that world look like to you? And let's start with Carrie.
Great, thank you so much. What a great question, and very positive. In a time of, I think, a lot of people after a rough year for our country and really for the entire world, it's nice to think to the future, because actually, if you think back 10 years, we really are moving in the right direction. And when you look at some of what is kind of the good news for women, and that is that we are continuing to have more opportunity, better opportunities when it comes to work, more women starting businesses, moving up, becoming CEOs, running for office, winning office. All these things are positive trends, and I really hope that continues. And I think that one thing that is also kind of important is that the conversation about what success looks like. I think it's starting to evolve more, and there's an appreciation that the difference, I hope this continues, is that the definition of success is not the same for all people, and we should be defining it based on what we want and not let other people define it for us. I worry sometimes that some of the messages that I got as a younger woman was, you're going to be measured. I went to fancy schools, and the expectation was that I was going to focus on my career, and I better reach the corner office and earn a lot of money and be all I can be in terms of being a professional success. And I think that there's been a lot of more appreciation. Some of the younger generation tends to favor flexibility over, over money when it comes to jobs. There's a lot of studies that show that that having that balance is more important to them, and I think that's positive. I hope that people in 10 years, women are looking at a whole life and defining success with their whole life, not just professionally. So I want my daughters to have all and sons to have all the options open to them and to be able to pursue their own vision of happiness, whatever that might be.
So now I'm going to ask you the flip question. It's 10 years from now and women are in a terrible place in America. What had to happen for that to be the reality, and what does that look like?
I think that the danger I see is a constriction of choices and freedoms. I worry sometimes that government is growing so large and dictating so much that it could end up strangling some of those opportunities that allow women to pursue and define their own vision of happiness. To be honest, and I know we got a lot of people from around the country, but so I don't want to rank on any state. But when I look at and see what happened just in the last year or so in California with the passage of AB 5, legislation that has made it impossible for many women to work as independent contractors, which was just devastating to a lot of caregivers, people with disabilities, older people who cannot work full-time jobs or cannot leave their homes. And even in the wake of COVID, that really destroyed a lot of opportunities. And you have, Patrice and I work with and identify some of these stories. And I don't want that to be our country's stories. I want there to be opportunities for people to work and have that flexibility. And I worry that we might head in the wrong direction when it comes to that. And force people back into a mold of kind of one size fits all. You either are a full-time worker or not a worker, and put women back in that box.
Thank you. Philippa, love to hear from you as well, the two questions, and be concrete if you can, if you put on the futurist hat. What do you see in 10 years that makes you think women are in a better place than ever? What does that world look like?
Well, I want to sort of riff a little bit off of what Carrie said, because I really like this idea that, success can look like anything. And so I really, really believe that very deeply for women and for men, for both. And so I think that I really agree with that. In the best possible world, we can do whatever we want, and it's all going to be acceptable. And we don't have to say things like, the woman CEO, like it's just the CEO, and we don't have to say the man who stayed, the guy who stayed at home. I can't think of the right phrase, but you know what I mean. Like he's just the parent who's at home while the other parent is working. We should not be saying the guy or the woman. So I see that as the best possible thing. And again, Carrie, I want to riff more off of you because I've been thinking a lot about. I feel very lucky. I don't have children. I only have to basically take care of myself. I have an income. I saw COVID has not been terrible for me personally, but when I look at some of my girlfriends who have children and they're at home and the burden on them right now is to take care of the children, even though, they have an equal partner, air quotes, I've been thinking a lot about how the pandemic has been very bad for women, and because the burdens often do fall on women, and the women have been losing their incomes more at a higher rate than men have. And so I just feel like if we don't have government intervention, that's going to continue, and in 10 years it'll just keep getting worse. And so I'm worried that, I feel very frustrated because I'm not an advocate for bigger government, but I am an advocate for government intervention when people are being hurt and the government has the power to help people. And so when I think about my friends who have had to quit their jobs because one parent, both parents could not be at home managing everything at the same time, I just feel like it doesn't have to be this way. We can do something about this.
Thank you, Philippa. I want to turn it over to Patrice. And if you can start with either the 10 years and everything's terrible, here's what that looks like, or 10 years and it's great. What do you see?
Well, I'll take the flip. 10 years and everything is terrible. You know, I think in 10 years, the graduating seniors or even the freshmen, college freshmen today in 10 years being, you know, in their mid 20s to late 20s in their career, I guess mid to late 30s, sorry, or mid 30s, early 30s, you know, feeling like they don't have the, feeling like, you know, if they choose to be a stay-at-home mom, that is somehow a failure on their part. And I think, and I say that because, you know, we've talked, a couple of the other speakers have talked a lot about women advancement in the workplace, which is great. But unfortunately, I think there's this movement that a lot of young women feel like they are failures if they're a failure if they get a 4-year degree, or they don't even get a 4-year degree, but they feel like mothering is their highest calling. And in some circles, a lot of Christian circles, religious circles, I should say, not just Christian, that's fantastic. And a lot of young women feel, women are happy to be stay-at-home moms, but they feel the shame from other women. And so, you know, if in 10 years we haven't removed the stigma around about women making that choice to be at home full time, they may be, you know, have gone to the best schools, they may, you know, have been top of their class, but for them, the best choice for their family, for even just for themselves, was I want to dedicate myself entirely to my family and be okay with that. And, you know, my sister and my, you know, and the woman in my church club, or, you know, my fellow alumna is not looking down on me, or it's not like, is that all you're doing? And I think that's a bigger question around, you know, what does feminism look like? What should it really mean in this day and age? And it's redefining what it means to own our own future, and to be okay if everyone does not want to be in the C-suite, if every woman does not want to even own her own business, if every woman does not see the same path to success, and redefining what success looks like, even if it means not what it's traditionally been meant to be viewed as. So if in 10 years we haven't removed that stigma, that's a problem to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Patrice. We'll wrap up with Kelly. What do you see in 10 years in your hopeful or perhaps concerned future?
I think a best case scenario for equity and equality, which is what I truly honestly believe is what will be a level of independence and freedom for women, is if the conversation Patrice just laid out is not just for women, is that if men who went to college, who wanted to stay at home because pet fathering was their true calling, were allowed to stay home without any social consequence. And that if women want to try to do it all, be working at home with a village, with a support, if that's learning outside of the home or a nanny or a daycare, that's also fine. And I think that so much of the time the conversation is simply about whether a woman has to make a decision between work and home, and so rarely about what a man is deciding with the future and success of his family at heart. That is so never a part of the conversation we have. And it is certainly part of the conversation I have in my own marriage, in my own household, in my own community. So for me, that's best case scenario, that a family unit, whether that is hetero or homosexual, makes decisions about earnings and support of their family, regardless of gender. Mm-hmm. For me, worst case scenario is 100% the loss of a woman to make decisions about her body. I think that healthcare, access to healthcare, preventative reproductive health is fundamental to a woman's freedom in this country. I think that it is a particular concern right now. I myself am pro-choice, but I don't expect everybody to be pro-choice. I do expect that this country has an ability to offer reproductive freedom and push against government control of a woman's body. And so worst case scenario is a woman no longer has control of decisions about her body with her God, her family, and her community and her doctor.
So that is a perfect segue to one of the many, I think, policy issues that is going to come up tonight, and one that is around the Supreme Court nomination of Amy Coney Barrett. So the issues of healthcare and abortion have been women's issues for a long time, and they're really issues for everyone. So let's start with Philippa this time. Philippa, what is at the heart of Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, the issues and the debates and the questions swirling around the country right now? What is at the heart of that for you?
I think she's amazing. She's extremely competent. She appears to be just one of the most brilliant legal minds in our country right now. So I just think she's really incredibly beyond competent. I think that the danger that, she's already expressed her willingness to strike down healthcare, Obamacare, the ACA. She's already expressed her willingness to vote against Roe v. Wade, a woman's right to choose. And so I'm just very concerned that we're headed in a direction that reduces the amount of freedom that women have. And freedom is very important to me. The ability, more liberty is very important to me. And so when we are faced with a jurist who is willing to diminish our freedoms as half the population, because we are women, essentially, that is very concerning to me. So I've been feeling very emotional. It was just, like I said earlier, I felt so emotional about the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then to have her replacement be literally a woman who, whose path was laid out because of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and now for her to be espousing ideas that go against everything that Ginsburg fought for, it's really hitting me very hard and emotionally. I even feel myself getting very emotional right now about it. And so I haven't sort of activated myself on this yet. I know, I live in Washington, D.C. It's very easy for me to go down and protest at any point. And there have been a lot of protests here. And I've kind of held back a little bit because, I'm kind of thinking, trying to be more strategic about our long-term political prospects. But anyway, I feel very emotional about this situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for flagging that. That's emotion is always really good data, as we have these kinds of conversations. I want to jump to Patrice on the same question. We heard from Philippa, more liberty is important to me. I'm wondering what is at the heart of the Supreme Court nomination and the issues swirling around it, the way you see it.
Well, what's at the heart is ensuring that the next justice to the bench is someone who's going to be faithful to the Constitution, a textualist, someone who is going to view, apparently, her role as an umpire, not as the one who's actually making law. Someone who is, for whom there's no litmus test on any specific issue, whether that is abortion or the ACA. And we can go back through Amy Coney Barrett's writings and on abortion and Roe v. Wade and find that she herself would probably say that it's the law of the land and it would probably stand. Now, different court challenges would have to be presented and we would see. I worry though when I hear different perspectives that, she's super qualified. She is, brilliant, and that's great. And I love that. I agree with that. But that if she doesn't follow our Ruth Bader Ginsburg's footsteps, and in her viewing her role on the court as one of an activist jurist, or Supreme Court justice, that we shouldn't be supportive of her nomination. And I think the hallmark of a good Supreme Court justice is someone who sets aside their personal views, sets aside their religious views, and looks at the law, looks at the federal law, looks at the Constitution and the specific case in front of him or her. And instead of making law, which is the purview of the legislative branch, really respects the role of the judiciary. And so that's why and not only just blown away by her, and she's like superwoman. I mean, at IWF, we talked a little bit about, wow, it's amazing what she's able to accomplish in her personal life and her professional life. But what's most important, I think, for me and for us, from our perspective, is what she would do for the court. And it's not a matter of being a left or right or shifting the court. I don't think the court should belong to either side. The court should belong to the law, and should have voices that are faithful to the law, not just to even social desires or the whim of society at any given moment.
Thanks, Patrice. Kelly, feel free to pick it up. And I haven't said this, but please do feel free to, respond to each other as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge amount at stake with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I have a lot of heaviness for the way that happened for her. I think she was doing everything. I think she believed deeply that the seat should not be filled under this administration. I don't think she believed that this administration would be a good steward of this seat on the court. I think the speed by which this confirmation is proceeding, and of course, President Trump is still the sitting president, and it is the job of the sitting president to fill vacancies in the court. But oftentimes there is more thoughtfulness given to the selection of the next Supreme Court justice, and that is a lifetime position. And the fact that Trump agreed to putting her up for confirmation the day he met her is unprecedented. I think that the biggest thing we have to face is November 10th, the sort of holding up the ACA comes in front of the Supreme Court. And if we're talking about women in this country, there are 40 million women in this country that had access to healthcare as a result of the Affordable Care Act. Many of them are full-time caregivers. They would not qualify if the Affordable Care Act was repealed, because this administration supports a work requirement for access to healthcare, which means women would have to work outside of the house, which reduced their ability to be caregivers. I think that Roe v. Wade is something that everybody should be, all women, men, everybody should be very concerned with in this country. I have personal differences with Amy Coney Barrett. I think that the sort of dictates of her faith community run in the face of how I live my life, but she's an independent person that gets to make those choices. I also, as a person, don't believe that a jurist on the Supreme Court needs to be a textualist. I think that this country and the people—
By the way, can you define textualist real quick?
Somebody that, and Patrice and Carrie, correct me if I don't describe this the right way, somebody that believes that when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, we should understand what they were thinking when they wrote those laws and interpret them as with the thoughts that the founding fathers had when they wrote those laws. So imagine, and Amy Coney Barrett has gone, while she was in Chicago serving as a judge, she went back and tried to imagine what the founding fathers would have believed, particularly in a case around the Second Amendment where a nonviolent felon, wanted to be able to buy a gun, and tried to imagine what the founding fathers would have done in that situation. I believe that modern civilization and modern laws should track modern living and not the living that the founding fathers did all those years ago. So I have concerns about what she will do there, but mostly I have concerns that this administration is making this appointment a political one instead of really vetting somebody that will be interpreting law for the next 45 years.
Okay, Carrie, take us home on this one.
Yeah, thanks. And I first want to just say something on the process, because I think that I understand this is the appointment for Justice or Judge Barrett is moving quickly, certainly. But the implication that that she hasn't been vetted, or that this was the first time that Trump met her. He appointed her, actually. She had been at the White House and had been undergone scrutiny before Justice Kavanaugh's appointment. So this is somebody who has long been considered and was received. She had just been appointed to the district court or the appellate court before, not that long ago. So it's the Senate already has vetted this woman. So it's not like that Trump made. When I looked at, I was thinking as when looking at the list, that I'd hoped that he would have picked someone with whom we were all familiar, with whom anybody who has been following this knows this woman, and knows, as Philippa said, that this is somebody who has, across the board, stellar recommendations. She's not somebody, he didn't pick the White House, somebody at the White House or something like that. This is somebody who was not a political pick, but she was considered a highly qualified by just about anybody, including those who disagree with her. But I understand the frustration and the feeling of tremendous loss for people who really revered Justice Ginsburg. But I think what I do think that it's, when I think about the difference between what a Ruth Bader Ginsburg brought to the court and what Barrett would bring to the court, I think the real question is about the role of the judge and the role, frankly, of the government and the Supreme Court. What I think when I don't think that you got it wrong, Kelly, in describing what a textualist is, but I think more it's about the separation of powers. It's not saying like what would Thomas Jefferson think about modern day problems. It's about what was the intention in separating out what powers did different branches have. And I think, it's interesting because I think when we think about Roe v. Wade, I think there's a misconception, and even with the Affordable Care Act, the idea that what would happen if Roe v. Wade was overturned. And again, I think Patrice is right that there's been hints that, in fact, Barrett is unlikely to overturn Roe v. Wade. But this doesn't mean that all of a sudden abortion is outlawed across the country. It means that this would be a question that would go back to the government and to the people to set limits on. It's funny, I mentioned earlier, and I'm probably going on too long, so I'll give my, I'll be quiet soon. I mean, it's interesting. I've spent most of the last 10 years living in Europe. I lived in Germany. I had a baby in Brussels. I've had a baby in Germany, and I was pregnant in Austria. So I've kind of EU. And one thing I think people don't realize is just that at least most European countries are way more conservative when it comes to abortion. They have heavy restrictions. You've got first trimester access to abortion, and then after that, it's pretty. You have to sign a piece of paper saying like I either want an abortion or I don't want an abortion, and then you're done. And I think that it's one of those things that's been strange in the United States is because of Roe v. Wade, we've become such an absolutely extreme country when it comes to this. And abortion is the one issue that IWF does not take a position on. We have people who are pro-choice, people who are pro-life. It's one I don't take any position on at all. I can see both sides of this, but I think that it's the lack of ability for the people to make any decision has made this kind of, my gosh, the idea that one woman, that one person could decide this for the entire country. I think it shows that, my goodness, the Supreme Court has way too much power. We need to give power back to where it's supposed to be, and that's with the political branches, so that all of us can have a say, and so we're not fighting or losing sleep over the one person who's going to be, or the 9 members of this court, because they should not be our rulers. They should not be the ones who say this. We should all be fighting it out in our localities and in Congress and in state and local representatives. They should be setting laws so we can have a part in it. It shouldn't be up to Ginsburg or Coney Barrett to decide what the laws of the land are. So,
I think I was
getting passionate too.
Yeah. Well, yes, I mean, it's something it's worth being passionate about, I think the reason the Supreme Court has such a sizable impact on this is because, as we've seen, as the power goes back to the states, the more conservative states set very, very conservative rules about the decisions women can make about their body. So there are very conservative states that set what are 6-week heartbeat bills, which is a medical falsehood. That's not a real thing. It's like a 6-week fetus doesn't even have the beginnings of a heartbeat. They have a nervous system that starts to create, that makes a sound that's like a heartbeat, but the heartbeat.
Well, that's your opinion. That's your opinion, but that's not. But it's interesting that you think we should decide that, and Mississippi shouldn't. I mean, that the people of Mississippi couldn't make that decision for themselves. I may be on your side on that, but I don't pretend that I know better what's better for Mississippi than, and that Mississippi, we should have this one standard and one set of belief across the country.
So every state gets to do it the way they want to, but what I said is not my opinion, it's science. The difference between how people name bills is for political purposes versus what the health and science is behind the reality of a pregnancy. And so what I was saying is the significance of the Supreme Court is because conservative states and progressive states push things in order to get some kind of federal standard around things of controversy. So
okay, then just to say, I think that's also
this will be the last comment on this thread. Carrie, go ahead.
After when you talk about an abortion after a birth, that's also when we talk about what New York is greenlighting. That's also awfully awkward when it comes to what's science and what constitutes a life. So I just know that, you know, this isn't my issue that I cover, but I think it's really like to say that Roe v. Wade is the only, like, has to be set in stone, and this is the only way we can do this, and that, you know, this idea that women will be doomed unless we have this Supreme Court seems, you know, I don't know. I think that I trust the people more than that.
So thank you both for that exchange. We talked as a panel before about sometimes you got to let the heat go up, because that's when you really hear what's at stake and how people are feeling and what the passions are on this. And it would be, I think, a bad conversation on abortion if we didn't see some heat. So thank you both for bringing that to the table. That was really, really interesting and insightful. And I welcome more of those moments of heat, just so long as we can also keep going. So thank you both for that. I wanted to go back to a couple comments that were made. One from Patrice, you mentioned how Amy Coney Barrett, how she balances her personal and professional life. She's the mother of 5. And then I think Philippa, you mentioned so much of the burden of COVID going to women, the burden of family, the burden of childcare. So let's switch to that piece of both women's roles with family. The expectations that are laid at women, you know, quite often, and many women like it. Some women like to have careers. There's like we said, a wide range of opinions here. But I'd love to hear from whoever wants to take this. What are the policies around childcare, healthcare? What are the ways that your vision for how women can have the lives they want can really come to pass? What path forward do you see, especially as we consider the election making that vision possible? So whoever wants to go, take it.
So I'll kick it off. You know, I think it's been a really interesting time, and as working at an organization with lots of women, we've been actually stay-at-home moms. We work all remotely well before COVID hit. So we're really keen and tuned into what it's like to be balancing those responsibilities. But add in virtual learning, and where you become suddenly the teacher on top of, you know, maybe having a spouse who's also trying to work from home and figuring out where you can have Zoom calls quietly. It has been interesting. And I would say a broader conversation around, you know, gender roles. Is it the man's job? Is it the woman's job? Is childcare, is being the primary virtual teacher at home, is that just for women? And I think I hesitate to say that it's suddenly a burden for all women, because I think it actually comes down to the individual families. I'll give you my example. You know, my husband recognizes that you know, I do a lot of television, I do writing, I do you know, my days are very varied, and he has made the decision to take on a greater childbearing responsibilities, looking after the babies. We were no longer able to have our nanny because we wanted to protect our kids, and so we're managing it however we manage it. But we've created a system within in our own home that works for us, and I think that's what a lot of families are doing right now. Now the challenge is when you are, let's say, a single parent. And I really feel for single dads and single moms who, some of whom may not be able to work from home. You know, and while 30–40% of workers have now seen they can actually do their jobs full time from home, you still have a large number of workers who have to go out every day. What do they do with their kids? And you know, hopefully childcare is an option if they're not to school age, and even worse, what do you do with your school age child and you have to go out of the home? And so that's where I think there's a role for public policy. And what's interesting is when we talk about, you know, has the Trump administration been good for women? Coming from a conservative perspective, the election of President Trump has been really the first time when we've seen conservatives start to embrace the idea of not just of paid leave and thinking through also childcare, but thinking from it in a more holistic perspective. It's supporting the family, supporting the worker, keeping women's workforce attachment, because we've seen women rise. So, I mean, it really come back into the labor force in a way that we, you know, has been a slow upward progression, maybe a little bit downward, but you know, how do you ensure that a woman has, or a family has, the support that they need? And that's why it's been encouraging to see conservatives start to embrace policies that will not harm or have some unintended consequences for women. And, you know, particularly around mandates for things like paid leave, but at least has brought in the idea that, hey, if you need to take time off to have a kid, or when we're talking about childcare, you know, how are you able to fund that? How are you able to pay for that if you're not able to stay at home during COVID? I think that's what's been exciting and interesting for us. But a lot of this comes down to everyday families. And I don't think everyone looks at it as a burden. I think we are it's actually forcing some redefinitions or even maybe the erasing of those traditional gender roles where it's just assumed that the mom is going to be the primary care provider while she's at home. That's not true in every household. And I'm sure I'm going to get lots of questions and people giving me pushback on that, but yeah, at least we're having that conversation and seeing now that it's not just the women's role, even if she's working from home, to be taking care of the kids. It's actually much more of a family decision than maybe in times past.
Kelly or Philippa, either of you want to respond, take on that?
I want to be careful about how I respond because unlike my three co-panelists, again, I don't have children. And so I'm just astonished that, you know, women can do this, can have careers and do all the things and have families and take care of their children. And honestly, I mean that because, you know, I was married for a really long time to an amazing person who was very progressive and who was so encouraging, all the things. And yet when I looked at him, I decided that if we were to have children together, we were not going to have we were not going to be able to do it equally. It was just my belief that wasn't going to happen, despite how liberal and progressive he was. And so, you know, essentially we got divorced because of this issue. And I mean, obviously it's always more complicated than just one thing. But anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say though is that, you know, I was raised in a very conservative family in which my mother told me that I had to have a man to take care of me, and that if I didn't get married and stay married, that I was incomplete basically, and that I was also incomplete because there were no grandchildren, you know, all the things. She told me these things, and you know, it was actually some very important men in my life that made me believe differently about myself. And so I've been really thinking about this since you know, posed this question earlier, Monica, in terms of how I was going to think about how to answer this question, because I feel like I'm stepping into a little bit of a landmine in some ways. But you know, I've been thinking about how if women want to have more power, we have to actually be given the power by the people who have the power, men. For example, like the right to vote. We didn't like get the right, we had to be given the right to vote. And so I've been thinking a lot about like men's roles in how we gain more power, how we have more power. I feel very frustrated that, you know, I have to actually lobby for my own power from the people who have the power, which is men. And so, but then I also at the same time recognize that it is certain men in my life who have actually lifted me up and shared their power with me and help and lift me up. So anyway, so all of that is to say, I'm very frustrated at how I exist in the world in terms of my power dynamic with men.
Yep, that brings up a lot. Did someone want to pick up on that thread? I think we can keep going on that for a bit.
You're
muted.
I'm sorry, I forgot. You know, Philippa, I really appreciate that, and it's interesting because I do think that that it sounds almost like a cop-out to say that the kind of moving beyond this, the need, and Kelly said this earlier, which I thought was really important, is this isn't just about kind of redefining the possibilities of what success looks like for women, and not saying, you know, you're not measured by whether or not you have kids. You're not measured about how, you get to decide what it is that you want to pursue and what that vision of happiness looks like. And the same for men. I do think that we do need to make sure that boys are raised with the possibility of pursuing a life as, or being a dad or being a caretaker is a respected and valued activity for them. This may be a little strange, but I think one thing I was thinking as you were talking, Philippa, is that I want to make sure, I feel like one of my challenges, or my something I think about as a leader of a women's organization, is this idea that I don't want to denigrate men. And I want to be real careful to not kind of put men into a box that I think that women, that we had to fight really hard to get out of, or our foremothers had to fight hard to break down these barriers for us. Because I think that when, especially most of the, I'm getting towards my late 40s now, most of the guys that I grew up with were, we were competitors and friends and equals. I certainly was not made to feel like that I was lesser, that my gender kind of constricted me. And those guys have mostly been pretty respectful. I think I actually had some doors opened as a young writer and policy person working in a libertarian organization. They were happy to have a woman. Women are kind of rare in the libertarian circles, so I was given opportunities that that the guys wouldn't have been gotten. It was an asset to be a female. So I just think that it's one of those things that then even especially maybe today, as we've increasingly decided that we don't want to assign a sex or to tell somebody who they are based on their biology. I think we need to be real careful and not demonize men. But also, just before I stop babbling, I think it's important. It's interesting when you think back kind of the history of why is it that men did have all the power? And that's for one reason, because throughout history, there is this is science and it's muscles. Men have muscles in a way that women don't. And they were able to have we had to develop as a society and as a human race to decide, and men had to decide that they were not going to use their physical strength to take advantage of women. And I do think it's kind of interesting. And when I think about where we need to have a real active women's movement, and it's almost a luxury that here we are going to be debating, how much childcare subsidies people should get and what paid leave policy should be. But there are a lot of women for whom their society has not evolved away from the fact that they are subservient to men because men can overpower them. There's still a tremendous share of women who live as men's absolutely as second-class citizens, and they are forced into marriages, not allowed to leave, not allowed to have access to their children, raped, and have no protection. So I think it's almost, there's a lot to complain about with guys in the Western world, but man, there's a lot of women out there who are still really suffering. And so I think it's important not to lose sight of that and to realize that we need to keep fighting for them.
Yes, I think that women in America have an immense amount of opportunity, but that is not without sizable obstacles as well. The premise of this conversation is about women in Trump's administration, and this question started with a level of burden falling on, is there gendered burden during a pandemic when people are homebound, when you're working and cleaning and cooking and raising and entertaining and teaching and being the camp and being school and being aftercare all at the same time. And a lot of the decisions in a family structure about where that burden falls is about earning potential, is about how does one fulfill the sort of financial needs of a family, and what are people's natural inclinations that don't necessarily fall on gender lines. And to bring this back to what's happening in the Trump administration, under the Obama administration, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, created rules and regulations by which corporations that employed more than 100 people had to report earnings data based on gender, race, and ethnicity to try to figure out if there was biased earnings in organizations, which is important because women are still the gender that makes children, that sometimes women can be punished financially based on their wage and salary. for taking time for the family. And the Trump administration rolled back that regulation. So those corporations no longer have to report earnings data based on gender, race, and ethnicity, which means families don't get a chance to understand earning potential because there is no transparency in corporate America around earning biases. And so if we're talking about a concrete example of how the Trump administration has taken a swipe at the ability for women to earn in whichever capacity speaks to them, maybe it's not motherhood for that, or maybe it's not stay at home, maybe in one family, if the woman was the major earner, then the burden of a pandemic like now would fall on the man, or maybe it's split equally. But I think that there are significant and specific policies of this administration, both in healthcare, as we've talked about, and in employment that have been backwards facing for women.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me jump on that. And
oh yeah, so you and then Carrie and Philippa. I'm so glad you brought up the economy and disparities. This was the last big topic to hit. So take it away, Patrice.
So I think, Kelly, you're talking about in part the pay gap and why women and men earn differently, and the EEOC, their regulations in trying to collect data. Maybe the intention is to demonstrate that there's a wage gap in different companies, and then, under different administrations, potentially target, penalize those companies that have some sort of wage gap. But let's take a step back and recognize that why is there a wage gap? Why is it that on average women earn less than men? Well, there are a lot of factors that go into that 20-cent gap, whatever it is currently. Everything from the type of industry she's working in, the level of her level of seniority, her education, the number of hours women work every day and every week. Men work more hours, work full-time more often. All of these factors, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has factored in and considered and said, well, really that gap is really just a few cents. And are they even willing to suggest that maybe there's something discriminatory going on? No. Private companies like payscale.com, which is actually a fantastic tool for every worker out there who is a woman, man, trying to figure out how much they should earn, has found similar results and provided a lot of transparency, because people are willing to share their pay data. What I worry though about is, this idea that because women earn less than men on average, that somehow it's a matter of discrimination, and it's a role for the government to come in and institute policies that's going to magically fix it. I mean, I think we've seen at the federal level, we've seen laws that are supposed to close the pay gap. Well, wait a minute, how can you close a pay gap that's really driven by our choices as women in the workforce? And I don't want to denigrate the choices that my sisters make, whether they are drawn to careers in caring, home care, homemaids, careers that are really important to building communities and helping communities, but don't earn the same thing as those in the STEM fields. So I'm really, when I talk to college students, very often, particularly young women, I tell them, number one, you're not a victim. And in the workplace, you're not a victim of some sort of gender discrimination. A lot of this is what you decide to do for yourself. Now, of course, we can all agree that there are instances of discrimination, and that's a great role for the EEOC to play. But when we talk about families and the difference between who's going to stay at home to do the childcare and the rearing, coming down to those who makes the most money, yeah, that may be true, and maybe that's what explains why a lot of women are the ones who tend to say, okay, maybe I'm not making as much, maybe it makes sense for my husband who earns more to do so. So I wanted to add some color and push back a little bit on that, because I think we hear very often about that, and that this is a role for government and government's got to fix it. Government's not going to fix something that's really about my choice in the workplace, in terms of how often I work, how long I work, what career I go into, etc.
So I want to hear from Philippa. She's got a point she wants to share. I want to make sure we're bouncing off. We're almost at the end of our time. So go ahead, Philippa.
Okay, I'll be really quick. I mean, Patrice, I really appreciate you saying that. Part of me is like being kind of reeled along. Like, I kind of agree with you, Patrice. Like, I see that. I think the thing I've been thinking about too is sort of kind of this cultural change that we need to make. For example, you know, when we have a president who speaks about women in the way he speaks and denigrates women in the way that he does, you know, at the end of the day, it's not to me about getting, I mean, I want to be paid equally, of course, but I don't want to be denigrated. You know, it's about my feet. It's very important for me to feel like I'm being valued, and money is not the way for me to feel valued. I mean, that's just my thing of, I probably should place more importance on how much I'm earning right now, but I want to feel valued. And I don't think our president values me or women in general. And that sets the tone for our country and the way we are treated by our fellow Americans. And I think that to me is more upsetting than the possibility that I might not be getting paid as a man in the same position.
So Carrie, before you share your comment, I just want to let everyone know that we're going to open up the floor for y'all raising your hands and asking questions very soon. You'll see in the chat a little note from Luke on how to do that. So start thinking about your questions, and Carrie, go ahead.
Sure, and I'll be real quick because I really just wanted to kind of talk specifically about the EEOC regulation that Kelly was referring to. So I think it's important to think about this kind of in a really practical way because I think that, you know, we all want there to be tools. Obviously, like, you know, I totally agree with Patrice. I think it's much more, it really bugs me when people just cite the 80 cents on the dollar wage gap, which is really like a lazy and misleading way to try to convince women that there's systemic discrimination. But obviously when there is discrimination, we want to be able to root that out. And it seems like forcing companies to report this data would be a great way to get at it. But in fact, the problem is that it's very rare, like the most jobs, especially most salaried jobs, are, you know, it's very easy to make sure that everybody who's working at a cashier's restaurant, in a cashier or whatever, or like and an hourly is paid the same by what they're doing and the roles they're performing. When you get to professionals, it's very hard to know when you have a salary negotiation. It's often not just how many hours you're going to work. It's what kind of deal you'd want it to make. Are you willing to travel? Are you working on weekends? Are you, you know, what's your very specific role? And one of the problems is there was concerns, and there was a lot of business groups that came back, including women's business groups, that said this is going to make it so it's much less likely that women are going to be able to negotiate all these many factors, because companies are going to say, I can't be hit with an EEOC complaint. Everybody who has this position has to do this. I'm sorry, I can't let you leave at 3 so you can pick up your kid at school or whatever it is you want to do. You can't have that flexibility because everybody has to have this cookie cutter job. And I think that is the backfiring. There's other ways to find discrimination, but we don't need to go back to something where everybody has a 9-to-5 job and has these very specific, you know, not everybody has to have the same contract and the same pay or same compensation deal.
Okay, thank you. We have gone through a lot, and there is still so much more that we could talk about. So we are still here for your questions, everyone who's joining us tonight. So please raise your hands on the Zoom, and I will look for those hands, and I will call on folks to unmute themselves and ask questions of our esteemed panelists who've really brought their whole heart to this conversation. Thank you all so much so far for doing this. Yeah, I see the jazz hands of agreement. Do I see more jazz hands of agreement? It's good stuff. All right, awesome. Stacy Nickel, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, hi, thank you. Yes, I was very stimulated by many different topics tonight. And the last piece of the conversation, I guess, struck me right now. I am a social worker. I own my own private practice. And when the conversation about STEM versus social work came up, I think that's a very, very complicated and rooted in discrimination factor. So social work is thought of as women's work, and women's work is chronically underpaid. Teachers, the people who have our children in their hands, are chronically underpaid. Why? Because it's thought of as women's work. And STEM, why is STEM so incredibly well paid? When I was at the top of my career as a social worker after a decade, I was making $32,000. And I had to go into private practice in order to actually make a living. So the idea that this is And I guess the idea that Donald Trump is someone who is a steward for women's rights is horrifying to me.
Stacey, if you could ask a question for the panelists.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I guess it was Carrie was the last one who spoke, and I believe it was Patrice also who spoke about the discrepancy of women's pay, and I wonder what you do think about the underpayment of work that is very, very important work in our society, but is not paid on that scale to any of us. Thank you.
Sure. You know, it's interesting because obviously there's a lot of complicated things that go into how much jobs are paid. Obviously, there's in a lot of parts of the country, in the teachers in where I live in Virginia, there's always people desperately looking for teachers' jobs because they're incredibly attractive, in spite of the idea that, that their pay may not be considered huge, but they are incredibly attractive work. And I think one of the misconceptions when it comes to why men earn more is this idea that they are all working as engineers and as CEOs and lawyers and all these, a lot of these guys are working in sewers. They're working as truckers driving overnight. They're working as prison guards and on rooftops. They suffer almost all fatalities that occur on the job are suffered by men. Most major injuries they tend to be in places that are like physically grueling. And again, you know, I do think that I wish that, you know, social work and childcare and a lot of these jobs that have, you know, they often have an oversupply. Again, childcare is one where a lot of times there are people who are willing to take on these jobs because they have jobs that meet their children's needs, but also because they want to be with kids. They actually enjoy it. They find positions. I just think that women are less helpless in this. And another thing I think is important to remember when we talk about pay gaps, it's one thing that's interesting, and it's a tremendously good news, is that you know, women are more than half of professionals and well over half of the people who are like the head of HR. They make a lot of employment decisions themselves and help dictate. Women have a lot of power. There's a lot of women out there who decide what things are paid. They're not just you know, tools of the system. They help create the system. So again, I appreciate, that's not to, there are certainly a lot of things that are underpaid, and I would think social work is absolutely, it's got to be a labor of love when people decide to pursue that, knowing the lower pay that it offers. But again, there also is a market, and the market does, that's what ultimately determines what most jobs, until government gets involved, what most jobs are paid.
I'll just tack on there. You know, when I brought up the two examples of work, it was not meant to be a value judgment of elevating STEM careers over social work or anything like that. So number one, please know that I'm not saying one is better than the other. And I'll also say I think it's going to be interesting to Carrie's point about the dangerousness of work and how that's rewarded in the workplace, in pay. As we're talking about police reform, and this is a total different topic, but as we talk about how do you reimagine policing in this country to incorporate social workers more, you're suddenly going to be putting social workers specifically in potentially dangerous situations. I'm curious, I'm throwing this out there, but it may be something where the salaries may start to reflect that that increased danger level. I mean, I think, to Carrie's point, the market will do a lot of the dictation here. And you know what? No one should feel in any way like it's a lesser job because that's their heart or their passion.
Monica, may I interrupt?
Yep, and then Kelly as well. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go, Philippa.
Just a quick, I don't know, you got me thinking, Carrie, about, I've actually been on two sides of two non-dangerous kinds of jobs that have very different pay scales. I used to be a lawyer, and now I work in the arts. And I don't know, when I was a lawyer, I got paid a lot more money than now when I'm in the arts, where there are a lot more women in my field. And I can't help but think that some of that discrepancy in the amount, you know, it's a lot of it's our culture, how our culture values art. Like, we think artists should be paid for free and get exposure, and that's a whole other rant that I'll go on to another time. But I don't know. It was an interesting transition from being in part of a very male-dominated profession and getting paid a lot more money than a very woman-dominated profession gets paid, where I get paid a lot less money, and it's not a danger issue.
Kelly, go ahead. Did you want to close?
Yeah, I certainly don't have the answers about how to make people appreciate the really important, financially appreciate the very important jobs in this country. And I think that coming out of the pandemic, let's hope that lots and lots of successful professionals that are, you know, that are now asked to teach their kids, there'll be a different level of appreciation for teachers and people that are working with our kids. I do think this country financially rewards people and jobs where connections are made. The reason it's so important to understand earnings is because there is an old boys network. Men intrinsically connect each other to opportunity, because connecting each other to opportunity will always lead back to opportunity for yourself. I do it now in my profession with women. I spend almost 100% of my time with women in the political space. I get jobs for women. I only mentor for young women. I almost exclusively only work for female candidates right now, because if we don't help each other, no one will. There's not a huge amount of opening up this sort of network. And I do think that, you know, I don't want to like drop a bomb, and I don't think this conversation should go by the way of unions, but I do support teachers unions, because I think a large group of people can advocate for better benefits or pay. A group is always louder and stronger than individuals. Again, I don't want us to go down a lane of unions. That should be a whole nother forum. But I do think that there is a level of opportunism and a way this country financially benefits places where it can come back around again. And I don't believe that to be teachers or social workers.
Thanks for a great question. I see Cheryl Grave. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Great panel, great conversation. I'm curious, building on one of the points that was raised earlier, maybe by Philippa, is this panel of accomplished women and really not depending on a politician, say, our president, for example, to define how valued we are. How do you see the possibility of a culture shift happening to create an equal valuing of women and our talents for the country and humanity? How might we do that? I think maybe Kelly, you were sort of mentioning it in some ways with mentoring other women, but yeah, I just would love to hear your thoughts.
I can be pretty quick. I've done a lot of thinking. It surprises nobody on the panel or in this forum that I was a fierce advocate for Secretary Clinton's run for president years ago. I believe that women have risen to the top of almost everything, but not to the very top. That glass ceiling is hard and tall. I think there are far fewer governors than there are Congress people. There are fewer female senators than there are House members. I think women are perceived as capable about doing every single job until the top one, and that plays out a lot in my own professional community. I'm a partner at a consulting firm, and the big consulting firms almost always have men in the senior partnership position. So the culture shift, I think, is a continuation of the drumbeat of supporting each other. When women run, women win. We need to build a bench. We need to keep going after it. After you lose, you get right back up there. I'm incredibly grateful that Kamala Harris is on the ticket on the Democratic side. I think I've long thought that a woman needs to sit in the vice presidential seat before this country can imagine her behind the desk in the Oval. So I do think, I think a culture shift is happening. I think there are more women serving than ever before across this country, but I don't think we're there yet as a country. I think the majority of Americans cannot imagine a woman in the Oval, a woman as commander-in-chief. But I think in my lifetime we'll see it. But I still think there's a lot of misogyny in these decision makings ingrained in people that we just keep talking about to change.
And I think it's worth noting.
Yeah, go ahead, Carrie or Patrice, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll just say, Kelly, I agree with you that it's important that we get women involved in the political process, in the business sphere, and being mentors to one another, sponsors, opening up those doors. I also think culturally we set an example in how we interact and how we talk about women, and really those who we don't agree with. And it's sad sometimes when I see conservative women who run for office. Trump supporting women who run for office and are denigrated most harshly by other women because of their political stance. Hey, you know, I'm going to vote for the person that I think is best to represent my interests, or best to represent from whose policies I think are going to be best for her community or for the nation. But there's also, you know, we got to be careful about how we talk about one another, how we treat one another, the questions we ask. You know, for example, I'll bring it back to where we started with Amy Coney Barrett. And some of the harshest criticism about her being qualified or able to ascend the Supreme Court because she's a mom of 7, and how is she able to even do that? And it's really just politically motivated. So that's the kind of stuff that I worry about, and that's what I'd like to see when it comes to a cultural shift. You know, when I look at the Black community, I'm Black, I'm female, I do see that there's a heavy emphasis in pushing Black men to respect Black women. To recognize their value and their place. And maybe that's a larger, there's something that we can take from that. But I also do think that a lot of men in our society very much respect the role that women play. They think about their mothers, they think about their sisters every day. And that may not always, it may not seem like there's respect for women or there's an appreciation for women, but I do think there is. And partnership, when men and women are viewing each other as partners, whether it's in the advancement of women in politics or in the professional sphere, I think that's where we're going to continue to see the value of women continue to rise.
I think men respect women. I just don't think they respect them enough to be the most important leader in the free world. And I would say on a lighter note that I think women being hard on women is actually a nonpartisan thing. It happens as much between Democrats on Democrats, Republicans on Republicans, and vice versa. I think one of the biggest culture shifts is about women truly and fully supporting women. As much as men support women. I do think that, and I think it's generational to some level. I think it's generational. I think the passage of time will be good for women's advancement. I mean, I hope, unless the whole 10 years what's bad thing happens, and that got me terrified.
All right, we've got a couple more questions. Christine MacArthur, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My question, when we were talking about the differences in income with different professions, I wondered what the panelists thought about having a universal income. I think it was proposed by Andrew Yang, about $1,000 a month for every, now this would be for each person, men and women, but this would be a way of cushioning people that were doing very valuable jobs that don't pay very well, especially people that are childcare workers, people that are working in early childhood education or daycare centers. I just wondered what the panelists thought about this.
I think the UBI is a very interesting idea. I was actually one of Andrew's consultants for a while and helped him flesh out some of those early conversations about it. I think one of the fundamental issues with our economy in this country is our tax code, and that the likes of Jeff Bezos are paying fewer taxes than probably Stacy, our social worker, forum member. So I think there is a fundamental problem, and the release of Donald Trump's taxes that has just come out, and the idea that the very wealthy in this country can afford to benefit and find loopholes in our tax system, and that the UBI would start to balance some of that out. I mean, the realist in me finds it very hard that this highly partisan two-party system would ever sort of integrate that level of public policy. But I think starting to imagine how we can close some socioeconomic inequities and some fiercely systemic socioeconomic inequities in this country is an important discussion that we should continue to have. And I think that it is a disservice to this country if we make it seem like sort of business as usual is good for all Americans, because it's very clear it's not.
I'll jump in though. You know, it's interesting because I think the UBI I think it's gotten a lot of kind of excitement in recent years, but this was something that Milton Friedman and it was talking about decades ago as a potential way to make the welfare state and the way that government operates less distortionary, basically to make it less harmful. Because obviously right now, one of the challenges we have is that we want to help help. I think that, everybody, Republicans and Democrats alike, you want to make sure that people who need help get help, but we don't want people to game the system and to never find fulfilling work, because work is valuable, not just because of, because we want to keep people's nose to the grindstone, but because it encourages a fulfilling life. And obviously, it's been interesting because I know there has been studies of the impact of doing a UBI. Does it encourage people to try interesting new jobs and to start new businesses, to take more risks? Or does it encourage kind of a sloth that would end up backfiring on people in over the long run? And I know that there's been some evidence of that it hasn't worked out as much as you would hope, that it doesn't, because obviously whatever the UBI is, you don't want that to be the end. It's one of those things that, if it worked and it actually helped move people out of poverty, gave them support so that they could move up, that they could find fulfilling lives and have a good full life. What you don't want is it for it to be something that then makes it so otherwise, people who would go find great careers, that they instead stay in their mom's basement and play video games and live off their $1,000 checks every month. And that is a danger. We do have to worry about that. And I know that there have been countries that have explored this and have had have mixed results and some disappointing results. But I think it's absolutely worth talking about and exploring. I don't think that this is this isn't something that, again, this isn't just a liberal idea. If we all want there to be a safety net, the idea is how to make it work properly. And it is worth noting that that we do have the engine of capitalism has been the biggest anti-poverty program in history. As we've encouraged trade and moved people, we've had a tremendous success around the world in eradicating poverty, and it's partially thanks to our the system of trade and development and private property, these property rights. Again, I think a lot about the developing world, and it is important to kind of not forget that how important that is. It's not just about handing people, how much money can you hand somebody? Because obviously that money has to come from somewhere.
May I interject, because capitalism is one of my favorite topics.
Yes, please.
I love capitalism. I really love the opportunities that capitalism gives me. And I really like the things, the creature comforts that capitalism allows me to have. And I love capitalism, but, I'm really worried that capitalism run amok, which is, I think, what we're experiencing right now, is actually hurting people. Yes, indeed, overall people, have been lifted up in general, but now we are in a moment when the wealth gap is increasing to the point where the only people actually making money right now are billionaires and the 0.001%. And the fact that billionaires are making more money during the pandemic than they've ever made just is incredible. It's just really incredible to me that it's proof to me that this is not capitalism anymore. It's something that something has happened that has turned capitalism on its head. And if we could have, dare I say, accountable capitalism in the Warren model, we could bring it back to the place where more people could actually benefit from a system that I'm really a big fan of. And I will nitpick a little bit with you, Carrie, in the sense that, I don't think Republicans are interested in providing people with a baseline. I can't remember exactly how you said it, so I apologize. But they have not been willing to pass another stimulus package to help Americans who really need it right now. And I'm really perplexed about why. It doesn't really make sense to me right now. And so, I worry that, I don't know, I'm still on the fence about a UBI. I actually live with a person who advocates for a UBI and is actually working on these policies. And so I hope he's not listening to me right now, but I'm a little bit on the fence with this because, to bring around, the conservative side, the conservatives that I've talked to who supported UBI, who are really into it, actually, they want to take away all the other social safety nets. And so, I don't think if we're going to do this, we can't take away all the other social safety nets while we're at it. And so anyway, so that's why I'm not quite there yet with advocating for that. But I do love, sort of the idealism around the UBI.
Hey, I know, Carrie, you'll probably jump in and respond directly. But I just want to add a couple of thoughts on the idea of poverty and poverty reduction. And I think it's interesting that the census actually just released some data about how American households have actually done in 2019, pre-COVID, obviously. And I think it's interesting that we actually have seen poverty hit its the lowest recorded level, so at least since the mid to late 1960s, and incomes hit their highest median levels. When you look at Blacks, for example, and I spent a lot of time kind of looking at how Black Americans are doing as a demographic that's been, really left behind for many different reasons. And you're seeing, again, pre-COVID-19, Blacks increasing in their incomes, hitting record high income levels, even before the prosperous Clinton years, for example, and poverty, again, falling to those lowest rates. And when we look at the Trump administration's policies, they have been around tightening our social safety net programs, not just because you want to kick people off the rolls, which we often hear, but really to right size, I think is the right way to think about it, our social safety net program, so that people who cannot work, who for physical reasons, emotional reasons, whatever the case, have the resources that they need, that our social safety net is temporary and not becomes a place where people unfortunately become a trap in poverty. And the idea of UBI, I think, is meant to get at that, but early results, as Carrie was noting, haven't necessarily meted that out. So, I think I don't want to demonize capitalism, because I do think part of the reason why we're seeing increases in income, more people moving into that 100,000 plus level, more families moving into that 200,000 plus level, which, frankly, to 5%, you're talking about 5%, the 2% of households in America, is because of expanded opportunities and because of pro-growth policies that I think make it work. But maybe Carrie, you can jump in on some of those other responses to Philippa.
So actually, we're gonna move on to another question, just because Philippa, while you were talking, I think we saw like boo boo doo boo doom, fire lit in our audience, which is great to see. So I'm gonna move us along to Deborah. You've had your hand up for a while, and then Roger. So Deborah, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. What a great conversation and reflection of our history and struggle for equal rights. I'm still wondering why women would vote for Trump. I guess maybe I didn't hear. I had to leave the room on a couple occasions. I didn't really ever hear specific policies or reasons why people thought that Trump was actually benefiting women. But what is really confusing to me is that some women that will vote for Trump do not seem concerned at all about his treatment and his attitudes about women. So retro. His affairs, the way he has spoken about us, grabbing us, touching us, very misogynist and actually very aggressive ways. I don't understand this. If someone could please tell me how they think maybe that'd be okay for their daughters to hear him talk about us like this. Really a president talk about this. Anyway, it's very concerning to me and upsetting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, obviously, I'm a conservative, a libertarian. I tend to be for limited government and free markets. But obviously, I think a lot of the stuff that that President Trump has said about women is appalling. I wish he would clean up his tweets. I feel like there's a lot of bad behavior. I would just think that, though, I think we need to be, we live in reality, and the reality is that he is sadly not incredibly an outlier. This is the same. We also know that President Clinton was what we would now, I think everybody would honestly say, he was a complete misogynist pig and took advantage of young girls regularly, talked terribly about women behind closed doors. Joe Biden's far from perfect when it comes to his record with women. This isn't to say everybody does it. It's certainly not a good response. And I do think it's a terrible habit of his of saying bad things about women. I will say, though, I do think that he doesn't. When you look at his administration, there are a lot of women who are serving in powerful positions. In the same way that the media doesn't talk about it much. In the same way that I care a lot about equality equality for gays. And it's interesting that the president has been an absolute a champion of gay rights and launched the first push campaign for to decriminalize homosexuality around the world. And he gets absolutely no credit for that. It's strange, I think, and in a show of a kind of a really biased media that he's that that absolute these facts are ignored. And so, and when I think about some of the reasons why I support the president, it is partially because of his Supreme Court picks. The fact that he's rolled back so many regulations, and Patrice is right that when you look at the economy we had in 2019, you had rising wages for the first time in decades. That's not an accident. It's partially because of the rolling back of regulations, the reductions of taxes. This has real consequences. And the economy, it's not just the economy. The economy is about opportunities. It's about jobs for people who had been out of work for years. And he was been a champion of prison reform. These are things that a lot of people give a lot of lip service to. And frankly, if you even look at again, I've been living overseas for a long time, and it's interesting because the president gets knocked as this, everybody hates him from around the world. Well, my goodness, does anybody notice? I mean, you wouldn't know it from looking at the New York Times or the Washington Post, but peace is breaking out in the Middle East in a way that it's absolutely unprecedented. And the ability that his administration has had to advance human rights around the globe, and their commitment to it is something that I'm proud to support. And I think it's shameful that it's received such little attention because the Obama administration had turned an absolute blind eye. They didn't do anything they wouldn't stand up to Iran. They wouldn't push for any human rights. They talk about it. They talk about it with the UN. But when the rubber hit the road, what did they accomplish when it comes to protecting human rights overseas, or even when it comes to, or advancing women's rights when it comes to the rest of the world? I don't know of any. I can't think of any accomplishments.
I think, are we supposed to be talking about how Trump talks about women? I mean,
yes.
We can have a different forum where we talk about Middle East politics or how he's perceived with the United Nations. But I think what Deborah wanted to talk about, and what I think I hear you saying, Carrie, is that you appreciate the other policies that his administration puts forward, and it allows you to not pay too much attention to what he puts out there about women on social media. I went back and looked about how he's spoken about women just since he's been president. And he comments about women's looks, good, bad, or ugly. He called Omarosa a dog. He talks about his family. He does not respect that there are boundaries about how you treat women in public. He just doesn't. And quoting presidents going backwards is looking backwards. I think what we've been talking about is the passage of time is good for women, and forward looking and expecting our male leaders to respect women is something we should expect to them. And as for LGBTQ rights, you can't give LGBTQ rights while rolling back protections for the T. His policies are so terrible for the transgender community. So the reason he doesn't get praise and accolades for his protections of the LGBT community is because he leaves our transgender community out in the open for tons and tons of exposure in a way that for access to healthcare and just general sort of rights. So I think that it's fine if everybody likes his policies abroad, but I think the idea of holding this man to account about how he perceives and communicates about women and not be an example for I just have sons, for our sons and daughters, is not something should be lost on whether you like his foreign policy.
Do you feel good about Joe Biden's treatment of women?
I think that a woman accused Joe Biden of a sexual encounter years ago. He asked for an open investigation. They went back into the records and he was willing to explore that. I think many women, dozen women, have asked for the similar kind of respect and investigation from the sitting president, of which he will not allow.
I will just say, Kelly, no one is excusing President Trump's language about women, the way he's talked about them. He's also talked about men pretty badly as well.
Like a bully.
And so I'm saying we're not excusing whatsoever what he says, his rhetoric, his tweets, whatever the case is. I think, though, that there are a lot of women, myself included, who look at the policies, who look at the people who are in leadership positions in this administration and the policies that they're pushing forward. as a woman coming from the Black community, I am more than happy, not just that he pardoned Alice Marie Johnson, who will actually be sitting down with and having a chat with later next month, but getting past, using his political will, going against some people in his own party to get the First Step Act passed. For 90% of the people who have been impacted, those were Black men. There's also maybe 5 or 6% of Black women in the federal prison system who also got early releases because of that kind of reform. Changing people's everyday situations. That means getting people off of the sidelines, women out of the work who had been sidelined in the economy for years. Getting them back into places where they can actually find opportunity. Start businesses. Carrie mentioned this earlier. 1,800 new businesses were started by women each day in 2017 to 2018, and again in 2018 to 2019. So when I think about, and I think a lot of conservative women or Trump supporters think about things like that, it's not that they're dismissing, overlooking, ignoring what he says. I think they're also, but I think they're thinking from a strategic standpoint, and hey, different voting blocks think strategically when they think about who they support. They're thinking about what they want to see accomplished. And I think those are some of the accomplishments domestically that we can look at from this administration.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Deborah, thank you for a question I think probably many folks were thinking about in the back of their heads. I appreciate that. Okay, we're gonna move along to a couple more questions before we are out of time, and I'm gonna mix it up by calling on a man, Roger Haynes, San Antonio, Texas. Unmute yourself and share your question.
All right, thank you. I really appreciate this discussion. It is really awesome. Thanks to the organizations putting it on too, and thank all the panelists, ladies smarter than me. So you were talking, and it made me think. My wife and I had these conversations. I'm a former military guy, retired. The banking industry that she was in and out of as we moved all over the world with the Air Force. You look at banks, there's a role difference. You were talking about there's always a female teller. Why aren't the females the VPs, the presidents, and those types of things? And it got me to think of this question for you. So how can our military, armed forces, civilian government people make the Department of Defense more inclusive to women? What are your thoughts on that? Does that make sense? I appreciate it.
I mean, I'm happy to start because I'll be brief because I'm not super familiar. I've never worked in the armed services. I'm not necessarily a policy person. I think culturally, from little age, young men are more sort of drawn to naturally and or encouraged about a role in armed services than young women are. And hopefully that's changing. I don't know. I don't have that aged daughters, but I think a level of understanding that no jobs are boy jobs or girl jobs, but they're just jobs and opportunities. Perhaps, again, I'm not sure that has been the narrative to date, or in the generations leading up to what the armed services look right now. Speaking of Justice Ginsburg, of course, she was the ruler on the court case that allowed women to matriculate through the Virginia Military Institute, which was a huge change in a culture around the armed services. So not knowing at all about the policies of the DOJ, I do think there is a level of education organizations or encouragement by families about the idea that doesn't matter what your gender is, that you can serve this country in that capacity. That would be my only response to that.
And I'm just going to jump in and just to change it up, and I'll say I totally agree with Kelly.
Hallelujah.
I'm thinking, picking up on getting young women involved in understanding that law enforcement, that military, that there are careers for them. I think that partnering with organizations like the Scouts, the Girl Scouts, where they're starting to learn some of those skills that are going to be necessary, survival skills, life skills, are actually a place where we should be pushing young women and opening their eyes to the types of careers that there are out there. I actually just recorded a presentation around getting more young women into engineering or electrician work, for example. And I talked really about helping young women to recognize that they have the skills, they have some of them very much naturally that would lend themselves to careers there. But when you talk to them, they'll say, I just didn't know that that this is a place for me. And maybe part of it is on the military itself to demonstrate that, yeah, actually we are a place that's very welcoming to women, where they can rise in the ranks, that there are, it's not just a certain type of career track in the military that you have to pursue as a woman. And again, hey, the benefits and the flexibility, those may be issues that they need to look at and thinking through from civilian or non-civilian, where those opportunities are and what those benefits look like.
I think we also learned from the tragedy of the death of a recent military, Vanessa Guzman, somebody their last name, that there is some, that there are some fundamental and foundational changes about how women having access to have people to lean on for the time in which that culture will change, because my guess is it'll be slow.
Thank you for that. We're going to take one more question and then move us to some closing thoughts. So Courtney, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. My questions, I had two and they were already asked and I couldn't unwave my hand. So to move on. Thank you very much.
No worries. Let's go to Fatima. Sorry, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Fatima or Fatima, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, Fatima, you got it right. I just sort of wanted to, this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you for organizing this as always. And I just had a question about Patrice. She was talking about, well, that, and also, forgot the other lady's name, sorry. Carrie, yeah, Patrice and Carrie, yeah, talking about, Trump's language, and they're saying, oh, we're not excusing his language, but, I have to challenge that. Anytime you don't push back against it, anytime you just sort of accept it, you're complicit. And, I hate to use that word because it sounds so negative, but you are excusing it when you don't challenge it, when you don't say, I wouldn't want my daughter to hear this. I wouldn't want my daughter to grow up. Can I finish, please? I'm not.
Yes, but make sure you ask a question.
Okay, so my question is, how would you feel? Let me ask the question another way. Even if you like his policies, isn't there anybody else out there that has the same policies but doesn't have this horrible, abhorrent behavior that is not becoming of a head of state of any country, much less a democratic republic?
Well, I'll just kick it off, and Carrie, please jump in. I think there are lots of different candidates that Republicans were looking at in 2015 and I guess eventually 2016 on the Republican side that may be more of what you're thinking of, Fatima, and thank you for the question. They did not win the nomination. They are not president, and it is not their administration. This is the administration, though, that we have. And I know I've been vocal. I've said on television before, the president's rhetoric is not excusable. It's not. It's not. And personally, and in my own household, I talk to my boys. I talk to my husband. So I hope we can disavow yourself and other women who think that we just are turning a blind eye and we really don't care. We do care. And we also care about issues.
Did you want to ask something else, Fatima, before I say something?
Could I ask a follow-up? Then if you do care, why aren't you speaking out against it?
We are. That's what Patrice just said. Patrice is on. She's on TV. She's on Fox News almost every day, and she will call balls and strikes when she talks about the president's language. She says that it's inappropriate. But again, obviously, and Patrice is absolutely right. This is a tremendously imperfect political process. Both parties, I think, often come out with a person where they don't think that can be an imperfect process. The person you want to have become the guy who you've got it, and at the end you have to make a choice, and you have to choose on a bunch of different things. Again, I would turn back, and it isn't to excuse things, to look in the past, But this isn't the first time we've had guys that are imperfect. This is, when I know a lot of people, when they had to look at Bill Clinton, they knew he had a lot of problems. They knew he cheated on his wife. They knew that there was credible accusations of really tremendous abuse. And the women's group still stood with them. And I understand that there's that you can say that this guy does a lot of things you don't like, and at the end of the day, I still think that he's got a better agenda for the country. But so
I have another follow-up question.
We're gonna move on, Fatima. Thank you for that question. That was a really, really good exchange. Just because we've got to get to closing statements, so we can wrap up tonight's extremely interesting and passionate conversation. Thank you all again so much. So I want to bring us back to the questions that we started kind of knowing that they were in the background of all of this, which is, what are the most powerful reasons to believe the Trump administration has been good for women? What are the most powerful reasons to believe the Trump administration has been bad for women? And again, the election is, as Kelly reminded us, 34 days away. So I want to bounce back red and blue and start with Philippa. With the question that you want to answer, go ahead and answer.
Well, first of all, I would like to nominate Monica Guzman to be the moderator for the next presidential debate. You've been so great. Thank you. I feel actually very hopeful about America. I have been going around the country having bipartisan conversations in like all kinds of places. And I feel that most Americans actually want to talk to each other, and that when we have sort of these polarized yelling matches, that's a pretty small minority of people who are screaming at each other. Unfortunately, obviously, they're the loudest people, and most of us are able to have these kind of conversations, and it's going to be more important than ever to do this, no matter who wins the election. In fact, it's going to be even more important after the election to be continuing these kind of conversations. And so I guess I just wanted to throw in my sort of hopeful story of, I do feel very hopeful, and that I feel like we've proven that we can do this just tonight. But I will nitpick with one thing, Carrie, and that is, I'm a little bit with Fatima on this. It's like, you even said, the president has bad habits. I wish he wouldn't tweet. And I've heard that a lot. And I'm like, I don't think that's strong enough. I mean, and Patrice, I've never heard you speak on television, so I would really love to hear you speak more. But, I think we need to have a very definitive, denunciation of the way he speaks, because he is the president of our country, and children do look up to him. We all look up to our leaders, and they do set the tone for our country. And I do think we have to denounce this behavior, even at the same time you support the policies, because it does matter to how people feel. Because as we know, the way we feel is so much more important than any policy that you can put out there, because we are all, at the end of the day, humans who actually make most of our decisions based on our feelings and our emotions, not on the policies. And so I think it's really important that our president represents us in a dignified way and respects us. And I do not believe that he respects 50% of the population of women. So I do think it's important.
Thank you, Philippa. Thanks for all the heart you've brought tonight to the conversation. Let's go to Patrice. So again, tell us, what are the most powerful reasons to believe the Trump administration has been good or bad for women? Go ahead.
I will just take it to the example, and thank you all, ladies. I enjoyed this conversation, and this is what we could have seen on the presidential debate stage last night, and we didn't. So hopefully we'll see that next week with the presidential debate. I'm going to take it back to 2016 when President Trump installed Kellyanne Conway as the campaign manager for his campaign. I don't know how far along it was in terms of where he was in the process, whether it was losing or whatever. But this is a woman who broke a glass ceiling in politics in winning the first presidential election as a campaign manager. And I think that sets the tone for understanding, and I've never met the president myself, but I think from what I understand, people who've talked to him have said he doesn't necessarily view men and women. He views people who work for him, what they're going to accomplish and get done. His language is not appropriate different many times. Sometimes I don't know how. I don't have a chalkboard keeping score. But I think, and what's important to remember is policies do matter. Emotions matter too. Emotions do matter, but policies matter. And when the two come together in something like a Supreme Court nomination, and that's why I believe it was one out of 5 voters in 2016 went out to vote because of the Supreme Court, and he won that 1 out of 5 by 58%. So that's when we think about, is he good for women? Is his administration good for women? If he's able to nominate a Supreme Court justice who's going to be faithful, be committed to putting a woman in the seat, says something about the administration and lots of the other issues that I laid out before. And I am hopeful that, you know, people can look beyond just their personal hate or aversion to him, and recognize that just because someone supports his policies, even likes him, doesn't mean that they are a bad person, but it means you need to understand and maybe appreciate that that's the calculation they're making because they think that he's going to be best for their interests.
Thank you, Patrice. Super appreciate the points you're making. So thank you. Kelly, take it away with your closing thoughts on women in the Trump administration.
Thank you so much for having me and for everyone coming in sort of late in the evening on the East Coast time. It has been lively, but as are most conversations about women and feminism, I'm sure everybody's shocked to know that I don't think Trump administration has been good for women, and I will bring it back to the policies. I don't think he's a good person. I think he's a bully. I don't think he respects women, but that's not why I don't think he's been good for women. I think mostly he's been rolling back with his policies a lot of healthcare protections for women. Yes, a lot of reproductive healthcare choices. He opposes Medicaid. He's rolling back Title X protections around access to preventative health, to cancer screenings. He's rolled back Title IX protections for women on college campuses, reducing the ability to have investigations around sexual assault and harassment. I think he prioritizes, I think this administration of which he leads prioritizes the economy, prioritizes building the economy at the sort of, at the behest of people, of community, of protections, of social protections. And I think we also have a real problem in our conversation about this president and past presidents. We've been saying these guys, that guys, those guys. What we need to be saying is this woman. It's time that a woman ran this country, and it's time that the American people get comfortable with the fact that a woman can sit in the Oval. So I fundamentally think that this administration, this president, has not prioritized what is important to women, regardless of party, race, or ethnicity. And I look very much forward to the next administration that is not run by Donald Trump.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for bringing the fire tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. 4 days.
Carrie, close us out.
Sure. Yeah, and again, thank you for hosting this. It's been a lot of fun and a great audience. I really appreciate all the questions. You know, I'm tempted to get into the whole Title IX on college campus because it's something I care passionately about, and it's kind of interesting. I won't get into the details, but you know what the administration did in that was rolled back guidance that made it that created a standard. So it was very easy for people to be, and it's often basically discriminating against men, where, and he said, she said situation, men were often basically not denied a modicum of justice. It's interesting because I think as somebody who, if we're trying to push back against sexism, having everything be about, you know, getting a woman in this, you know, I want a great president. I want to have a great leader, but I really care, like, whether or not she has girl parts or boy parts is really less interesting to me than what they stand for. So in some ways, I think it's strange that at a time when we have a move away from kind of defining people by their sexuality, to be so focused on if it's a girl or a boy who's going to be in the Oval Office. And then also, I think that another thing I think is kind of, important. What I think about what the Trump administration has done right and what it's done well for women is what it's done well for America. And that's restoring the government to some of its proper roles. And that is rolling back some of the regulations, trying to move some of the programs that are supposed to be for the needy and reserved for people who need it, from being something that, I know friends who are sitting here and making, $100,000 and are getting free school lunches. These are supposed to be something that is for the poor, not just for anybody who decides they don't want to make their kid a sandwich. And when you grow programs that are supposed to be a safety net for those in need, that's not generous. That's not being kind. That's being mean to people who actually need it, because trying to get it so you actually have a safety net that serves people in need is not callous. That's smart. That's being efficient. That's being kind. And I think that it's strange that that as Americans, when this wonderful country was founded, it was based on the idea that we are a free people and that our government was supposed to have a very limited role in our lives. We weren't supposed to look and say, oh, yes, like, oh, this president, I hope he's so great and he means so much to me. I would love to have a president that I thought was like the best, most respectable, and that we could be completely proud of. And I do think that the president, I wish his personality wasn't off-putting to so many. But man, I think we shouldn't spend so much. The federal government should not be so important in all of our lives. And really, I think it isn't. I walk around, I talk to Democrats, most of my friends are on the left, and they don't, most of the things we agree on, and we have nice lives, and we talk about our kids and things like that. And that's what makes America great. And I think it's too bad that so many people think that the sky is going to fall on one way or the other. If Joe Biden becomes president, it's not the end of the world, or it certainly shouldn't be, because the federal government should not dictate whether you're happy or not, or how you feel about this country, or whether you feel about your life, and it shouldn't have be the thing that decides, poverty or not for so many. Again, it should be there for people in need. I'm all for a safety net, but it shouldn't do everything for everyone. And I think it's a problem that it is. And that's why I think the president has more respect for the idea of a limited government and restoring the basic concept of a republic, which is supposed to be about people's freedoms, not about government doing everything for all of us. So thanks again.
All right. So with that, round of jazz hands for our amazing panelists, being willing to step into this discussion all the way. I learned a lot tonight. I really hope y'all did too. I hope you got some different angles on some issues. I hope you heard some things that were surprising. And thank you all so much for showing up and being here. Thanks again to the National Institute for Civil Discourse, to the Independent Women's Forum, and Carrie and Patrice from the IWF as well, to Philippa, to Kelly, and I'm going to hand it off to Luke for final announcements.
Yeah, well, Monica, you did a wonderful job moderating this. I appreciated you on that. Everybody give Monica a round of jazz hands. And all you panelists, this was a hard topic. This was an important topic. This is something that reaches out and touches everybody's lives in this country in a way that that is both political and personal, right? And I think what you demonstrated here is that it's a hard conversation, but it's a conversation that can be had and should be had, and should not be had in a way that is meant merely to convince, nor merely to change people's minds, but in a way that does justice to the true complexity of this. And we at Braver Angels are honored to be able to facilitate these kinds of conversations, and we hope definitely to do more of these.